Hi, everyone. I'm MJ. And now that we have the rules out of the way, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's talk. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that Rethink's office is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with the multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And now to introduce today's speaker. We know how complicated the holidays can be. It can feel extra complicated post-cancer diagnosis. So we're really honored to welcome Natasha Iwa to speak about this today. And she has a very impressive resume. Natasha is a 33-year-old licensed clinical social worker who currently practices as a licensed psychotherapist through her private practice, I Thrive Therapy and Wellness. Natasha also has some firsthand experience coping with cancer herself and coping with it through the holidays and winter months, as she was diagnosed at the age of 29 with stage 2 estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. Natasha also works full-time as a program director, developing a new platform that will decrease poverty in the city of Norfolk, Virginia by 50% in the next 15 to 20 years. On top of all this, she's a spoken word poet, a Zumba instructor who enjoys shopping a little too much. I think that's a self-identified situation. Someone who likes aesthetically pleasing house decor, finds joy in organizing closets. I need your help. And anything that reminds her of nature. So we are so grateful to have Natasha here to share her knowledge with us as this month's expert. So welcome, Natasha.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with all of you this evening. So yeah, I guess I'll move on to my slides and kind of get started. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And please feel free to drop in the chat if you cannot hear me well enough, just so that I can be sure to speak up. All right, so yes, thank you again, Shauna and MJ, for introducing me. As MJ has shared, I am pretty much of a busybody and don't really know how to sit still. So in addition to everything that's going on, I was more than excited when I received the email from the ladies about tonight, and I'm excited to just share some tips with you all, provide some psychoeducation, as well as what I find to be most important is normalizing the experiences that we have and how it interjects and intertwines with the holidays. Myself, when I was diagnosed, I was actually diagnosed a couple of days, about a week or so after the Christmas holidays, less than 2 months after getting married, and about 1 or 2 days, I think, before the new year of that following year. So we were deeply embedded into the holiday season, and boom, I get the news that I have stage 2 breast cancer. So as MJ mentioned, I know firsthand what that experience is like, how much it can take away from your mental stability. But along the way, I have also learned how much joy and how powerful it is to tap into the little nuances that can bring us joy. And as a psychotherapist, this is something that I do on a daily basis. And tapping into joy is not an easy thing to do. It is absolutely easier said than done. But I'm here tonight to let you guys know that it is doable with intention. So again, the name of my private practice is I Thrive Therapy and Wellness LLC, which I actually started after finishing chemotherapy. And that's how I came up with the name I Thrive. I wanted to thrive. I didn't just want to survive. And as a psychotherapist, I felt as though it was my duty to also help others learn how they can thrive versus just surviving. And in therapy and wellness, kind of putting those together demonstrates that with therapy, you can find wellness, and in wellness comes therapy. So that's how I came up with the name. I am trauma-informed care certified, Risking Connections trainer. I am certified in mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as chakra and aura healing certified as well. And all of those things I incorporate into my practice. All right, so mental health. I'm going to pop up one picture, and they're going to look different side by side. So prior to a cancer diagnosis, I chose this picture here. After a cancer diagnosis, I chose this picture here. Now, this is the left side of a brain and the right side of a brain, with some art going on. I would like to know from you guys in the audience, before I continue, looking at these two pictures side by side, obviously one is black and white, the other is, very colorful. I'm curious to know what you see. And feel free to drop your responses into the chat, and Shauna will, share those. But what do you see? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Okay, so I see some great answers coming in here through the chat. So one is that before it was clean and clear, and then we have afterwards, we see a bit of chaos. We see some interwoven interacting strands or elements. The first photo I see overwhelmed, second photo I see growing in resilience.
I like that.
After a mess of colors and overlapping mess, brightness to me is growing, boring versus exciting. One is define boundaries and one breaks out of the bounds.
Wow, awesome. Those are all very great responses. Now, the reason that I asked that question based on these two illustrations, one, to demonstrate how differently we're all going to perceive these two illustrations. And then secondly, to show that even in the midst of how differently we may perceive them, there still is this common theme that one is a progression of the other. So when I saw these, the left side and the right side of this brain, which actually was one picture that I chose to split in half, the first thing that I felt that I was seeing is that one demonstrates naivety. And it reminded me of who I was prior to cancer. And I want to add this disclaimer in there that oftentimes when we are talking about a health crisis, such as cancer, sickle cell, whatever the case may be, we often hear life after cancer, right? We often hear that cancer helped me to become, or that because of cancer, I now can. And I want to stress that there are going to be individuals who may not feel that much different to who they once were before their diagnosis. And that is okay as well, because sometimes there's actually almost this unspoken pressure that we're all supposed to flourish from this black and white side of the brain to this very colorful, resilient right side of the brain. So what I saw is, on one side is naivety, who I was up until the age of 29, going on 30, and living life not thinking that breast cancer could ever be me. I was taught that if breast cancer does not run in your family, there's nothing to be concerned about, basically. And the reality is, as I have learned very, very in-depthly, that's not true. On the right side, what I saw, very similar to what someone responded, is resiliency. I saw that as dampering as something like cancer can be, that if I wanted to be intentional about seeing color in my life, that the color was there, but the shades of those colors just might be slightly different to what I would have assumed they would be prior to cancer. And so that the world is still beautiful, the world is still intricate, there's still a lot of nuances, and I have to look for that if I want to see it. When it comes to mental health, I always say, just like physical health, we have to be intentional. And so what that means is you might have to avoid certain foods to avoid an allergic reaction. Well, with mental health, you may have to avoid certain people in your life. You may have to avoid certain thought processes. you may have to avoid certain environments in order to be able to thrive. So thank you for sharing those different things that you all see here. I really liked also the boring and exciting. I have met a couple of individuals who do believe that their life is a lot more exciting after cancer, because now their mentality is, I've gone through cancer, nothing can scare me, therefore nothing's going to hold me back. Whereas I've also spoken with individuals who feel the complete opposite, where now, because of fear, they feel like their life is boring and they are being held back. So again, we see things differently. So I also want to go into the difference between mental health and mental wellness. And my reasoning for this is because we use it interchangeably and it's actually very different. Mental health as well as mental illness is also used extremely often as one and the same, and that's very different as well. So as we can see up here, mental health is made up of three core areas. That includes our emotional self, our social self, as well as our psychological self. So emotions, as we know, feeling sad, feeling happy, feeling excited. Our social self is based on our interactions with family, so familiar interactions, professional interactions, those that we have that are interpersonal. And then our psychological state is how our brain functions. So what we in the therapeutic world call CBT. So our cognition, our behaviors, and then how we respond to that. That's our psychological self. Overall, it affects how we think, how we feel, how we act, which helps us to determine how we handle things such as stress and how we relate to others and make our choices. As we know, mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood all the way through adulthood. And our mental health can be negatively impacted by a variety of events. It can be a difficult marriage, struggling with taking care of aging parents, work-life balance, or something like cancer. Now, our mental wellness is our awareness of those emotions, and more importantly, our ability to manage and express those emotions in an age-appropriate manner. And so what that means when I say age-appropriate manner, again, in the therapy world, we have this understanding that I can be 33 years old, but my emotions may not align with that. Right. And so a 33-year-old, ideally, you would have an idea of how a 33-year-old might deal with stress. And you know that it typically shouldn't look like how a 16-year-old or a 12-year-old deals with stress. But the reality is, when someone is not mentally well, those two things are out of sync. So your chronological age may not align with your emotional age. Our mental wellness also includes having both good mental and physical health. They go hand in hand. High life satisfaction and a sense of meaning, and overall just feeling good about who you are and where you are in life at that particular time. So, doctor says these three words: you have cancer. Not a set of words that anyone ever wants to hear. Even if there is a family history, I don't know that it's a set of words any of us can truly prepare for. Some of the things that I have heard, including some of the thoughts that I have had myself when I first heard those words are you sure? Am I going to make it? One of the common ones is, what did I do wrong? So self-blame. What is it that I ate? What is it that I didn't do? Did I not exercise enough? Did I drink too much alcohol? Was I around someone who smoked tonight? I wasn't fully aware. What did I do wrong? Very quickly going into self-blaming, being self-critical. I want a second opinion, which is not a bad thought to have. I don't know if I can do this. There's just no way. So before moving on to the next slide, I would like for you all to drop into the chat box, what are some of the other thoughts or statements that you made when you heard these three words, you have cancer?
Okay, so we have some answers coming in here. We have, how is this possible? Which I'm sure is a
Okay.
common one. We have, who's going to take care of my son if I die? We have I lived the life I want to live? Become the person I want to be or become? Then we have a comment, I was saddened, filled with grief, wondering what is going to happen to me.
Okay.
And then just the word why. And then I knew this would happen because I thought about it in this way. Did I bring it on myself?
Okay.
What happens next?
Thank you. Thank you guys for sharing that. I don't know if you guys picked up on the common theme, anxiety, thinking about the future and what could possibly not come. Anxiety is rooted in fear. When we are experiencing fear, our anxiety goes up. Now, of course, that looks different from person to person, sounds different from person to person. But how is this possible? Who will take care of my son if I die? Have I lived the life that I've wanted to live? What is going to happen to me? Did I bring this upon myself? For the most part, we are projecting what we are going to miss out on. And when we fear that we are going to miss out on something, not be there for something, we become extremely anxious. Now, one of the things that I find disappointing that I think that globally we can absolutely do better with is prescribing mental health and mental wellness as a part of the prescription, right? And so when you go in and see your oncologist, your surgeon, your radiologist, anyone else that you have on your team, their role is prescribed into your treatment plan. But very rarely, at least speaking for the United States, very rarely is anything about our mental wellness scripted or prescribed into our treatment plan. Imagine going into a doctor's office, as I'm sure most of you or all of you can, and you're left to process these 3 words, and then you're sent home. And we'll call you back in a couple of days to start talking about the next step. So you're sent home to deal with 3 words that sure are plain as day, but create all of this emotional confusion, tension, right? And then you're at home, and maybe you're at home with someone who also doesn't know what to do with these 3 words, and you're left to bask in those words, not knowing what to do with it, not knowing how to manage it. And what do we do at that point? We go straight into survival mode. So all of these thoughts, are you sure? What did I do wrong? Who will take care of my son if I die? At some point, and I don't know if you guys, in hindsight, can think back and identify when, but at some point, the majority of us, keyword majority, it's not all, at some point we just kick right into survival mode. I don't know if I'm not here to take care of my son, I don't know who will, but right now, what I do know is that a treatment plan is being put together for me, and I'm choosing to fight if that's what the person chooses to do. And I'm a realist in the sense, and I'm very intentional about this in my practice as well. You will find me saying words like majority for the most part, because I know that not everyone chooses to fight. And fight is also a subjective word, right? So I more in a healthy way can put it that not everyone chooses to comply or go along with their treatment plan. And we all have that right. But at some point we go into survival mode. And for some individuals, survival mode means going through chemo, radiation, taking hormonal therapy. And for other people, it means shutting down. One of the ways that I realized that I shut down after receiving my diagnosis is when my surgeon, had mentioned that, okay, these are the steps that we can take. I did go with a bilateral mastectomy. I asked him for 30 days, exactly 30 days. I have no clue why I asked for that. I didn't know what my plan was during those 30 days. I just know that I needed somehow to process what was being told to me. And I did not want to walk into something without full understanding, not just of what my treatment plan meant, but how I felt about it. Because I know that after a mastectomy, that's another step of emotions that I would need to deal with. So, oops. All right, so again, just going back to what anxiety means. And like I said, anxiety is very much rooted in fear. As we know, fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. I don't think that there's anyone here tonight who would not agree that cancer is a threat. It's a threat to our livelihood. It's a threat to our sanity. It's a threat to our happiness. Anxiety is a feeling of worry. So if you are experiencing this unpleasant emotion that feels like a threat, it's only normal that you begin to worry. You become nervous, you become uneasy about this imminent event. And then just based on this pattern of responses that you guys shared on the previous slide with an uncertain outcome. Because we're uncertain of what tomorrow will bring, when you hear those three words, we do start to ask those questions. How is this possible? Who will take care of my child if I'm no longer here? Survival mode, it's the factor state of continuing to live or exist, especially in difficult situations. And, in my private practice, I always like to stress to my clients and to myself, if you woke up this morning, even if you don't feel good, you survived. You made it another day. And that alone, you should be proud of. Sometimes we come down on ourselves because we feel as though we need to survive a very particular way, or we need to survive in a manner that's conducive to society and what society tells us, right? You're going through treatment, people want you to be grateful. And sometimes you don't want to be grateful. And that comes with the territory of dealing with imminent danger, something that feels like a threat and brings uncertain outcome. I don't know anyone who is in the middle of a car accident who's thinking of all of the things there. You might be thinking to yourself potentially, and I don't want to speak out of term here, but sure, maybe, you're thinking of all the things that you're happy about, but I don't know, in that very moment, there's no studies out there that show that as this car is rolling in the middle of this car accident, you're saying, I'm grateful for this. What you want to do is survive, and post survival, post that imminent moment, you can then say, whew, I'm grateful that I made it. I'm grateful I survived. I'm grateful for my family. But a threat is a threat. And whether we feel threatened by a bear in the middle of a forest or we feel threatened by cancer, it doesn't feel good, and you're going to be anxious. So some other valid emotions outside of anxiety and fear include feeling terrified. Sometimes we feel emboldened, right? We feel emboldened to tackle this, to take this head on and do what my doctor tells me, and let's hit that next step. But how about feeling angry? I know for me, I battled with that. I didn't want to be angry, but I was angry. I felt that if I was angry, people would think that I was ungrateful because I had, I'm in a country that can provide treatment. But nonetheless, I was angry. I didn't ask for this. There were times where I blamed myself and I had irrational thinking, and I was angry. Confusion, feeling broken, feeling scared, and another common one, feeling alone. Cancer is one of those things that you can be in a room full of people and still feel isolated. On the left here, I have the stages of grief. So there are 5 stages, standard stages of grief. There are some studies working right now. So you might at times also hear that there are 7 stages of grief. But the basic 5 include denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and then acceptance. And so what these basically mean is you hear those 3 words, you have cancer. For some of us, we're in denial. This can't be true. I want a second opinion. Doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. There's just no way. When you finally have your results and it settles in that this is real, then comes the anger, which is also rooted in fear. Once we shift from the stage of anger, all of a sudden we settle into this phase of depression. Now what do I do? What do I tell my kids? What do I tell myself? I don't even know how I feel. From depression, we shift into the bargaining stage. What bargaining means is for those of us who may believe in a higher power, who may meditate, go to church, go to a mosque, whatever it may be, this is when we start to bargain with God. We start to say, God, if you keep me alive, I'll do A, B, C, and D. Or we say to the universe, if I can make it 10 more years, I'm going to go to this country, I'm going to go to that country, I'm going to help this organization. We start to list all of the things we, for a split moment, did not think we'd be able to do. And that lends to what someone had stated earlier. Have I lived the life I wanted to live? This is where bargaining comes in. So you start to bargain with yourself. What can I do in the meantime? With the time maybe they're telling me that I have left, or the time that I want to use in a way that can bring me as much joy as possible. And then we get to the stage of acceptance. And this is where we say, I'm not excited about my cancer, but it's fact. It is my experience. It is part of my story. And there's nothing I can do about that. Now, granted, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance are, kind of cyclical. So it kind of goes in this circle. I want you to know that you might not go through the 5 stages of grief in this order, right? So you might go to anger first, and then depression, and then bargaining, then back to shock and denial before acceptance. And then another thing to keep in the back of your mind as well is once you go through all 5 of these, it doesn't end there. Guess what? We go through them again, and we go through them again, which is why 5 years after a cancer diagnosis, whether you're stage 4, whether you're stage 3, stage 1, at some point you sit back and you assess your life and you're angry again. You might be angry for 1 hour. You might find yourself angry for the next 60 days. But these 5 stages of grief come with a cancer diagnosis. And then when we talk about the holidays, and then we have COVID-19, and we've got all of these pressures, more likely than not, you will go through these 5 stages even quicker. So that cyclical pattern is going to happen very, very quickly. And then you feel confused. Then it becomes overwhelming. And this is when we find people, kind of slipping into that stage of clinical depression, generalized anxiety, social anxiety. Before I go into the next slide, for the first time in my life, I experienced social anxiety after my diagnosis. I could not be around other people. If my husband left to go to work, I broke down in tears. The only 2 people I felt comfortable around were my husband and my best friend. Outside of that, humans felt it brought me, it heightened my grief, I'll say that. And it was something that I needed to work through, but it was also something that I needed to acknowledge to get to a place of mental wellness. So in order to feel mentally well, we cannot ignore our mental health, our mental disparities, our mental issues, because you cannot ignore the problem or the issue or what's scaring us and jump right to survival. Before I keep going, any questions, anything that anyone has dropped in the chat box?
Nothing's come through, but I'm sure people are, just holding them until the end of your presentation.
Absolutely.
So we're just processing what you're saying right now.
Sounds good. So as I mentioned earlier, we talked about the difference between mental health and mental wellness, which I also said is very different from mental illness. When our emotions become disruptive to our capacity to survive effectively, keyword effectively, that's when it becomes something we want to be more alert to and to pay more attention to. So mental health issues, I always say it's the difference between a mental health issue, and I know that, again, we kind of use this word loosely. Issue can be a scary word. Diagnosis can be a scary word. Typically, when most people hear the word diagnosis, it's almost like doomsday. Something is so wrong with me, I can't come back from it. That's not necessarily the case. We all have issues, right? Whether it's financial issues, mental, physical, spiritual, commitment issues. We all have something, right? So mental health issues can compare to a seasonal cold because we all get them. It is something we all have, mental health issues. I'm yet to meet a human being who is happy all the time. It just doesn't exist. So a mental health issue can be sadness or excessive worry, which is compared to a seasonal cold. We all experience sadness, and at some point in our lives, we all experience excessive worry. Now, a mental health illness is one step above that. So that is something such as major depressive disorder or psychosis, which can be in comparison to cancer. So now it feels like a threat. So my sadness has gone from sadness to major depression. So it's gone from something that all human beings deal with to what part of the population deals with, right? So again, we all at some point in our lives will deal with some health issue, cold, what's something else, just kind of like those common things. The cold is the only one that comes to mind right now, but we all don't deal with cancer. And we all do not deal with major depression. Though mental health issues do not necessarily equate to a mental health illness, having poor mental health can absolutely eventually lead to both mental and physical illnesses, such as anxiety disorders, PTSD, major depressive disorder. Graves' disease is something that can stem from stress. There's just a plethora of different ways that our emotional selves manifest into our physical selves and vice versa. So as we can see on the right, based on 2018 US statistics, 1 out of every 5 individuals suffers from a mental health illness, again, which is one step above a mental health issue. 19.1% suffer from anxiety or disorders, and there's generalized anxiety, there's social anxiety, there's more specific types of anxieties. 3.6% suffer from PTSD, which is an estimated 9 million Americans, and 7.2% suffer from major depressive disorder, and that's an approximate 17.7 million. Doesn't come up enough, but in my practice, what I find is that cancer absolutely can yield to post-traumatic stress disorder. Cancer is traumatic. Cancer is heartbreaking. Cancer can shatter someone's world. And it only makes sense that that trauma leads to excessive stress that keeps you from being able to survive effectively, even if it's just for a short period of time. Like most things in this world, there's a way to manage it. And in my practice, one of the first things I tell all of my clients is, if your doctor tells you that you have diabetes and this is how you can manage it, if I tell you that you have PTSD, this is how you can manage it. So it's acknowledging it, it's owning it, and then realize I can tap into some level of joy by learning how to manage these symptoms. So after a cancer diagnosis, studies show that 1 in 3 individuals will experience a significant emotional and or mental distress. Up to 25% of those diagnosed with cancer will display symptoms of depression. Up to 45% will display symptoms of anxiety. And many will also show symptoms that meet criteria for, again, post-traumatic stress disorder. This picture of the bear I decided to put up there because it actually reminds me of a trip to California. I think about a month before I finished treatment, and I don't remember where we were, but I was sitting on a rock facing a large body of water, and the bear was me. And I looked out into the water and I said, and I acknowledged, I'm anxious, I'm in distress, and this diagnosis has put me in a place where I don't know what tomorrow brings. And as soon as I acknowledged that and owned that, I was then intentional about looking out at the beauty of the water, thinking about the things that make me happy, thinking about the things that once brought me joy, and also thinking about the things that I hope one day can bring me joy. Mindfulness is so important when someone is going through cancer. It's not easy to do, but it's one of the best things we can do. It's being mindful, it's being in the present, because when we try to project the future, our anxiety goes through the roof. COVID-19 and cancer, what are some of the things that I have observed? Well, primarily that cancer patients, thrivers, and survivors find themselves actually feeling worse and extremely anxious, hopeless, emotionally restless, and depressed after active treatment has ended. And I found this to be the case for myself. I find it to be the case for some of my clients as well, because this is when the work, the mental work, actually begins. So from the point of hearing those 3 words, you have cancer, determining your treatment plan, going through chemotherapy if you did, going through radiation, your multiple surgeries, then they send you on your way. And then what? Now, the fear, the anxiety, the depression, the confusion, the anger that you felt in the beginning and you still felt throughout treatment, all of a sudden comes rushing back. But now you're on your own and you're no longer blanketed with treatment, right? So before you were in survival mode, you were doing something about the cancer, something, whatever that something was. And again, suddenly your doctor says, well, I hope it doesn't come back, and we'll see you every 3 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, once a year, whatever the case may be, and go live your life. That is one of the hardest things to do. When you have been in survival mode for months, potentially years, and you're told to just go find joy again, go live your life, go be someone, go be with your family, with your kids, go travel. Being in the middle of a pandemic and going through something like that, extremely difficult. And I want to acknowledge anyone who is in that space right now, that you're not alone, and it's valid, and you're a human being first. And those 3 words, you have cancer, are words you will never forget, no matter how long after treatment it may be. Depression and anxiety, it's also important to keep in mind that depression and anxiety can also hinder recovery from treatment. So when I am working with clients who have either been through cancer or have a family member with cancer, because some of my clients are caregivers, I try to, stress how important it is that as much as, we're acknowledging our fears and our confusions and our anger, those very same things can keep us from healing in the way in which we need to heal. So it can be a hindrance to our recovery. It can be a hindrance to our quality of life. So it's about eventually finding balance. And I'm a true believer that you can't find balance without acknowledging your fears. And once you acknowledge your fears, next step is to say, how do I manage it? What do I do about it? Who do I need in my circle to help me manage this fear and anxiety? Because it's not going to go away, but you can manage it to feel a little bit more fulfilled and enhance your quality of life. So what can help with that? Therapy and counseling is definitely one. And, not being biased or anything as a psychotherapist, but therapy is amazing. Therapy is absolutely amazing. I am a huge advocate. And when I'm doing my intake process with my clients, one of the very first things I actually tell them after, getting some of the basics, I say, if you do not feel like this is a good match, fire me. And I will be absolutely okay with that. Just like if you don't feel as though your oncologist is hearing your concerns, you move on to the next. If you do not feel as though your nurse is, validating your needs, you ask for someone else. If you go to therapy and your therapist doesn't seem to be cognizant of what your mental health needs are, you don't go back. You find someone else. It is a professional relationship. This is your livelihood. You're already dealing with a health crisis. You're already dealing with COVID-19. You're already dealing with day-to-day pressures, work, family, responsibilities, bills that never stop coming in. If your therapist doesn't feel like a healthy fit, move on to the next person. The difference between therapy and support groups. So support groups is another way of receiving support. Therapy is run by a licensed mental health professional. So someone like myself is a licensed clinical social worker. And what we use are very specific approaches. So for me, in my practice, I use CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. I use MCBT, which is mindfulness cognitive behavioral therapy. And I also use logotherapy, which is an approach that focuses on finding meaning in your life. And our ethical standards are also very different. So unlike a support group where you share your feelings and experiences, granted, ethically, no one should be talking about what is discussed in that group, but by law, they have every right to. Whereas in therapy, confidentiality, HIPAA violations, whatever is said in my office stays in my office. Support group, a number of individuals come together, share your experiences, your emotions on a particular topic. Support groups are typically led by someone who has also gone through the same thing that those group members have experienced. It is not led by anyone who's trained or licensed. It's not led by a professional. It can be led by a friend, just anyone in the community. And so those would be the differences between therapy and a support group. I'm an advocate for both. I think if you can go to both, please do it because you get something different out of each of those things. I will never tell anyone don't do a support group because you're going to therapy, and I will never say vice versa. If I know someone is a little hesitant about therapy, go to a support group because at the end of the day, you need a circle, you need a place, you need a space where there are people who understand. So going back to who can help. So when it comes to, let me just go back. When it comes to therapy, which is, as I mentioned, needs to be provided by a licensed individual. Such licensed individuals might include a licensed clinical social worker as myself, now depending on the state that you're in. And I'm not sure what the acronyms would be in Canada, but there would be the word licensed somewhere in there for sure. So, and then also a psychologist, a licensed professional counselor, or a licensed marriage and family therapist. If you need medication to help you manage your symptoms, you would need to get that from someone who has obviously gone through a medical program, such as a psychiatrist, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, your primary care physician. Primary care physicians they can prescribe lower level psychotropic medications to help with anxiety and depression, but they are not the ones who would prescribe something for like schizophrenia or psychosis. For that, you need to make sure that you are seeing a psychiatrist to get the right medication cocktail, and your family nurse practitioner can do so as well. So some reasons a person may not seek or accept help. Now, in my practice, I often will hear individuals say, well, I've been thinking of therapy for about 4 years. And then I ask them, well, why now? And sometimes it's, well, I didn't want to think that I was crazy. Or I didn't want to own the fact that I was feeling depressed. Or, I'm a person who believes in God, so it just didn't feel right. I hear a lot of different reasons for why someone may not accept help. Sometimes it's financial barriers, insurance barriers. But I would say most of the time it's this internalized dialogue that keeps the person from accessing something that can actually help them to move forward and to tap into their joy. Some other reasons include, some of us just actually aren't ready to unpack what actually happened. When I was going through my academics, they tell you that to be a therapist, you need to have a therapist, because not only are you unpacking other people's, problem areas, as you do so, you have to be able to unpack your own, which is very scary. Fear of accessing your fears, that's scary. Another one is, I just want to move on. I'm done with treatment, done with chemo, done with radiation. I don't even want to hear the word cancer anymore. I don't want anyone to buy me cancer paraphernalia. I'm sick of people telling me that I look great. I just want to move on. And being in therapy forces you to access your fears. Attempting to regain or establish your new normal, which is a part of just wanting to move on. Not having insight into who can help you. And then sometimes it's your current stage of cancer where you're just physically not able, right, to participate in therapy at that time. One of the positive things that has come out of 2020 is increased accessibility virtually. And so moving forward, most insurance companies, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for Canada, are allowing, therapy offices and the different insurances to provide therapy over long periods of time virtually, where the person doesn't actually have to get up and physically come to the office, which is a great thing. Some things that can help with improving our mental health and enhancing mental wellness. Working out, not always easy to do, right? Maybe your range of motion, you don't have great range of motion because you've had surgery. But something as simple as walking if you can, something as simple as moving your ankles if you can. But movement is so important to mood stabilization. So we have working out. We also have knowing your triggers. For me, during the first 6 months after my diagnosis, my biggest trigger was someone asking me, "How are you?" I hated that phrase. I'm just going to be frank. I'm just going to be honest. I hated anyone asking me how I was because, one, I wasn't feeling great. And two, I expected them to know that. And I kind of was in the space of, why are you asking me something you probably already know? And then I had to realize that with good intention, they were trying to assess how I felt so they can help, respond to me in a way that was most appropriate. But knowing your triggers is important. And sometimes it's a song. Were you listening to a song on your way to the doctor's office when you got your diagnosis? Is it a certain question? Is it a certain shirt that you wore that day that reminds you of those 3 words? Being out in the sun. So many of us totally underestimate the power of the sun. Now, I don't want you to do this in like scorching, heat, 98-degree weather. But the sun is a natural purifier. And what it does is it increases the serotonin within our brains, which helps to improve mood. So sometimes I'll tell my client, walk to the mailbox 3 times. Allow the sun rays to hit you. That is very powerful. I have prescribed for my clients to walk outside with their bare feet, plant their feet into the ground, soak in the sun. It is a natural purifier, not just for our plants, but also for ourselves. So spending time in the sun, having good sleep hygiene, having a consistent, and we know how difficult that could be during treatment as well, but as time progresses, developing a healthy sleep hygiene, going to sleep around the same time every night, and attempting to get out of bed at the same time every morning. Even if you don't have anywhere to go, getting yourself out of bed, putting on a new shirt, getting yourself some coffee or some tea, playing your favorite song, that can do wonders. And if all that does is get you to 12 noon, you just made it to 12 noon. That's what's important. Dark chocolate, it's good for you guys. Dark chocolate helps with improving mood. There's lots of studies out there, very bitter, but it's good for you. Meditation, so things like yoga, guided meditation is really good for mindfulness and being in the present. And then also setting goals. My nurse navigator gave me one of what I think was one of the best advices I received throughout my treatment. And she said, every month, set a goal that you can look forward to. She said, at least once a month, have somewhere to go, someone to see, something to create. Because when you have those goals, you have a purpose. You have a reason to survive those next 30 days. you have a reason to thrive those next 30 days. We're not going to think beyond that because that's when our anxiety kicks in. But set small goals, small attainable goals, so you have a purpose that month, that week, or that day. I share this with all of my clients in my practice, what my overall belief is. And my belief is that at I Thrive Therapy and Wellness, even though I'm a single practice, I say we, because I eventually plan to grow. We believe that thriving is to flourish without borders, which looks, sounds, and feels different from person to person. I was very intentional about that statement because it's key to understand that my depression may not look like that of someone else's, though there will be commonalities such as changing in sleeping patterns, eating less, eating more, not showering, agitation, things like that, excessive worry. That doesn't mean that the next person is going to have those exact same symptoms. So it looks different from person to person. It sounds different from person to person. It is also our belief that in order to flourish, that all human beings need a team, a tribe, or person within their community that can offer integrity, quality, confidentiality, compassion, and respect in addition to advocacy. I Thrive Therapy and Wellness transcends cultural, denominational, social, economical, and disability distinctions. And I Thrive welcomes all to discover or rediscover the joys and path that helps them to thrive. And from there, I came up with I Thrive Therapy and Wellness, and here I am today. And here is my information. And that's all I have.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Tasha. That was great. And you can stop share. We have some great questions. You gave a ton of information, and I think you answered some questions. It was nice to have the interactions kind of in the presentation. That's new for us. I'm going to start with a question that I think builds on something you shared about your own experience. Someone was saying that just really simple pleasantries like, how are you? Trigger. Now, I know kind of the tips you provided were a little bit more on how to cope with those triggers, almost like internally, or to make yourself feel better. But their question was, how do I respond without coming off as negative or insincere? So maybe it's those coping mechanisms help you, but in the moment when you're triggered in a conversation, do you have tips for just, I guess, things to say?
Yeah, so absolutely. And it's actually easier to internalize than it is to have the external, what we might deem as appropriate response. What I first want to stress to this particular question is that you are the individual who, at that moment at least, feels that your life is in danger. It's a threat. So how you feel is really what's valid. So if someone is asking you, how are you, and you feel yourself getting sad or getting upset by that question, I would strongly encourage that in that moment, you tell that person, I'm not ready to answer that. Right now, I know that, and I've felt that way at times where, well, what if I'm coming off rude? What if I'm coming off as dismissive or, angry, maybe? And I don't know how you guys will take this, but if you are, then you are. I really want to stress that. And if you are, and the other person is uncomfortable with that, and this is something I also work on with my clients in my practice, it becomes their responsibility to deal with that. When someone is in the middle of a crisis, whether it's a physical crisis or a health crisis, it is not that person's responsibility to appease the emotion of the other person who's not in a crisis. So what I want you to picture is, imagine you fall down the stairs or something of that state, 911's called, ambulance comes, you're the one with the broken leg, but the person who doesn't have the broken leg wants you to make them feel okay. It's not very fair, right? So just owning and being okay with saying, and if you're really nervous about making the other person feel uncomfortable, it's okay to say, I don't know, and I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, a couple questions that I think build off this nicely. We had two questions come in about boundaries. So I think what you're sort of the way that suggestion you gave is basically setting a boundary.
Right.
But one person asked, how do you politely set boundaries with extended family, which I think is a great holiday theme. The other question was, or more of a comment is, I feel like I don't realize I've kind of, that my boundaries have been crossed until it's almost too late. Like I'm kind of in the thick of it. Um, how do I kind of understand what my own boundaries are, or can they change? Can I apply them retroactively? Um, can you go back in time? Maybe you've given too much, crossed your boundaries, and now you want to tell that person, I don't like that anymore. How do
No,
you know?
for sure. Boundaries, I think we have this misunderstanding that boundaries, once they've been made, they're set in stone, but boundaries are actually very fluid. Boundaries are akin to what you need in that moment. So if in the month of January, I need more alone time, my boundaries should align with that. And in February, if I want to spend time with the entire world, then you should be able to shift your boundaries. With extended family, that's a difficult one, because as we know, they want to sometimes shower us with care and love. And I'm sure you can all attest to this, that sometimes you don't even know what you need. And so when they are showering you with all of this care and love, it becomes so overwhelming, you start to get upset, maybe even a little angry. So setting boundaries can look like, telling a family member or telling someone that you trust to help you communicate that boundary so that they're helping you to reinforce it. Because what happens sometimes is I might set a boundary and say, for the holidays, I really just want it to be myself and my husband, not feeling great. I'm just really emotionally not up to it. And then your mom gets upset, right? Or your grandmother gets upset. You don't want me to be there. I'm just trying to be there for you. You can then bring in someone who you trust, whether that's a spouse, a really good friend, maybe your child, adult child, and say, I'm trying to get this across. I don't think it's working. Can you help me reinforce this boundary? Boundaries sometimes are ineffective until there's a community in hand reinforcing that boundary, right? I can come in and say, don't come into my office. But maybe it's not until I have a sign that says, do not enter, does it become more apparent. Now, someone's feelings are going to get hurt in the process. We're human. You're hurting. Your family members don't want to see you in the pain that you're in. They're hurting, but you're the one in a crisis. And like I tell all of my clients, you have to put yourself first during all of this.
Thank
How
you.
they feel you can deal with later.
Okay, a little bit of a twist on that is you're putting yourself first, surrounded by caregivers. But we had a question come in ahead of time, and I see a similar one in the channel. What if your caregiver is not doing well, like mental health wise, or maybe having some mental issues? So we had someone in the sort of sending in the advanced questions say, how do you deal with a caregiver who's having mental health issues, but is supposed to be there to care for you? And then I see someone in the channel saying, when your best friend seems to shut down or might possibly be depressed, and it could be like just from the kind of year we've had with the
Yeah.
COVID and quarantine. It could be she doesn't know how to cope with her friend's diagnosis. We're not sure. But how do you approach her when you're not feeling supported? It's kind of the opposite of boundary. Like
Yeah,
maybe that is a
definitely.
boundary to say.
Well, it's a form of boundary, because what I'm hearing in these questions is, how do I do it appropriately without causing more threat or harm to the person who's experiencing the mental issue? So I'll start with the caregiver who's not doing very well. In a situation like that, I would always say helping that person as best as you can get some form of support. If you are going through your own health issue and the person who is intently supposed to be helping you and care for you isn't doing well either, there's nothing that can be done until they get some help. So one of the things that you can do is say, hey, I've noticed that you don't seem to be doing well. And that's always touchy, no matter who the person is or a sensitive topic. But they need to get some mental health support before they can support anyone, especially someone who's going through cancer. Because what can unintentionally happen is, if they are not mentally in a stable place, they will do more damage to your healing process. So encouraging them to get some help.
Thank you. So yeah, I think we've talked about anxiety and triggers. A question came in, how do I handle crippling grief? Um, for this person, Christmas is actually the anniversary of two tragic deaths. So already, this time of year, unfortunately, is very difficult. Tips on coping with that kind of grief.
Crippling grief it's tough. I'm going to say that first. Grief is something that, so kind of, I don't know if you remember those 5 stages of grief that I had gone over, and I had mentioned that once you get to acceptance, it doesn't stop there. It kicks right back in, whether it's a year later or 5 years later. Crippling grief, when you're experiencing that, you want to do as much as possible to not be alone. It's unhealthy to be alone in the midst of crippling grief, especially during the holidays. If there's an anniversary date that's approaching, I strongly encourage, and I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, but if you can ideally do so virtually, telephonically, what do they call it with the iPhone, FaceTime, but creating some sort of structure where you are not alone at that time, on that day, the day before, the day of, and the day after. Being in the middle of a pandemic, we feel isolated enough as it is. And then on top of that crippling grief, you shouldn't be alone. And it's unfortunate that the pandemic is so much of a hindrance. And so we're very limited right now, but I strongly discourage from being alone because the mind is very powerful. And that crippling grief could take you to a place you may not know how to come out of if you are alone.
Thank you. Here's one that just came in. Do you have ideas how not to be very triggered at Christmas time? It's difficult at Christmas to feel the sadness of a stage 4 diagnosis. And what are your tips on staying in the moment with my husband and kids, especially when you want to have a great Christmas and make fun memories? So without feeling like you're faking it, how do you balance that?
So one of the things that I would suggest with that is coming up with a plan prior to or leading up to the Christmas holiday. And so what I mean by that is getting with your spouse, getting with your kids, and being transparent beforehand. And being okay with expressing that, hey, I don't know that I'm actually up for the holidays. I feel like I will be faking it. Once you are then transparent, the next step would be to kind of put together some sort of plan. And in that plan needs to be things that you want to do. So for the holidays, we do, right? It's about others and making others happy, bringing joy, giving gifts, making others feel cheerful and at home. But in that moment, I want you to be okay with saying, this is what I need. And maybe what you need at that time is laying on the floor, surrounded by your family, not talking. Because if you find yourself talking, you may become triggered, you may become upset, then you start to maybe feel guilty, and then it kind of spirals from there. I'm ruining everyone's Christmas, I'm making it about me. But if you have a conversation leading up to that, it's not just about you, although you are the important factor in that moment, but you've made it a family affair. And so they can rally around you, and remember, you're reminding them that I just may not be up to it. But again, I'll go back to saying that you are the important person here. That doesn't mean, and it doesn't minimize, that your family members are not, as important. But I want you to see what you're going through as a crisis. And you need that support. And sometimes getting through it is just being very candid and saying, I'm not up for it. And hopefully they ask you what you are up for, and maybe it's pizza and silence.
Yeah. I think that's just so hard. I mean, all these situations are so hard. And I guess that's part of acknowledging it. Someone else had said, I'm just so scared for my children, recently diagnosed with stage 3 triple negative. What can I do to cope? And I know you addressed that in your talk, just the fear that so much of this is coming from a place of fear.
Right. Yeah, and just to reinforce that part of coping with it is understanding that it is mine, it is our responsibility to either seek out the support or accept the support, I strongly do encourage that you find someone to talk to. There's so much relieving power in being able to speak to a counselor and cry for 45 minutes. Those tears that you cry, not only are you getting them out, and I like to say that our tears are like our body releasing our toxins. That's how I like to see it. But not only are you getting it out, you have one less thing to feel guilty about because you have really dealt with it effectively by doing that with a professional, versus maybe if you were to do that with your young children, and then now you're stuck with feeling guilty for having done that. Now, that's not to say that you won't have your moments, but it is your responsibility, like you have recognized, I'm scared. I am so afraid for my children. But to be there for your children to the best of your capacity is being there for yourself and finding someone to talk to.
Thank you. I think we've gotten through quite a few of the questions. There was one, I mean, I think it's so different this year with COVID restrictions. And even if maybe this person is traveling perhaps, or going to see their family for 4 weeks and has to cope with isolating from them. So I'm not sure if whoever sent in that question is here tonight, but does that mean, how do you do that? How do you cope with that? You're there, but then I can't see you yet for 2 weeks because I'm self-isolating.
So
there's all kinds of other COVID situations.
well, so when I hear that question, I think boundaries, right? So one of the questions I would actually implore that person to ask themselves is if this is something they actually want to do. Is this trip being taken to keep family cohesion and, keep others platonic and cordial and happy? Or is this something that that person actually wants to do? Now, if it's something that that person actually wants to do, then very early on, you set the boundary that while I'm isolating, right, let's think of some fun ways to communicate, whether it's texting or FaceTime, and just making it a little bit more fun. If it's not something that you want to do, it's going to be very, very difficult to navigate that, because you're going to feel even more isolated probably than just being at home, because it's like being in a room full of people, but you can't touch anyone, you can't talk to anyone. So potentially, and I say potentially because we're all different and we all respond to things differently, but potentially that can feel a bit torturous. So again, I go back to, if that person was in front of me, I would ask, is this something that you really want to do? And if so, which is fine if they do, nothing wrong with that. If so, what do they hope to get out of it? Is it to break away from home and just get some fresh air and be somewhere different? If so, then we know we can set our boundaries around that. Is it to be around family? And if so, then we know that we have to talk about the limitations while you're there. And if it's because, well, this is just what we do, and I want to keep up, our, our annual, kind of thing that we do every year, then that's probably something that the person wants to sit back and say, as the person who's in the crisis, should I be doing this?
So many questions we have to answer, and it's actually coming up quick. It's like 2 weeks away.
Good questions, great questions.
Yeah, so I think we've pretty much covered everything. Just going to quickly do a quick scan. I thought I saw someone someone having trouble returning to work because of social anxiety.
Okay, that's another quite common one. It's that social anxiety can stem from just some fear and anxiousness and angst about people asking questions, looking different, right? I don't know if prior to leaving work, people were aware of the diagnosis. If they weren't, I can imagine that it's even scary to return. People are naturally nosy, right?
Mhm.
People want to know how you're doing, what happened. And even if people don't ask directly, that person might make the assumption that people are looking and can notice some of those changes. So I would say that obviously work is a responsibility and we can only hide from it for but so long for most of us. So having maybe a conversation with your supervisor, if you feel comfortable, only if you feel comfortable with your supervisor, to say, hey, I know I'm returning, but I'm a little bit anxious, because then it really becomes your supervisor's responsibility to help shield you from some of those things by setting some boundaries, whether it's within that department, within that office. The other side of that would be to consider, what are some things that you might need to challenge yourself with? Because the anxiety is something that social anxiety is something that we can get through, but we need to get into it, challenge ourselves, see how we feel, tweak some of our responses, learn to manage it, and then from there build some different habits that help us feel more comfortable when we are at work.
So like incremental progress.
Right, exactly.
Okay, there are two more questions.
Okay.
Originally, I was looking in the chat. So someone's saying that I find worrying keeps me up at night despite my best efforts to let things go.
Mhm.
Any tips? And I know that's common. You lie down and
The mind goes wandering. Right. Nighttime and first thing in the morning is when our depressive symptoms are the worst. That's when we worry the most. Not only is it dark or the light's just coming up, but it's also when our mind is the most idle. So we have the most brain space to think, to process, to create narratives that either exist or don't exist. So what I would suggest is a couple of things. Melatonin can be helpful, though we naturally produce melatonin in our brains, which is part of our circadian rhythm. So that goes back to when I talked about a healthy sleep hygiene. It can take a while to get there, but making sure that you're lying down at the same time every night, even if you're not tired, even if you find yourself alert and awake for 4 hours before you go to sleep, start training yourself to lay down and to start to decompress. And what you should find is progressively over time, from 4 hours to 3 hours to 2 hours to maybe 45 minutes. So you'll still might struggle with being up and thinking, but ideally it should not last as long, which shouldn't be as disruptive to your sleep pattern. Lavender has relaxation properties. So a lavender essential oil, lavender bed sprays, or having lavender in your diffuser can be helpful. And then the other thing that I think is great, which I use till today, is white noise. So either just, on the stereo or on my phone, going on YouTube, typing in noise of nature, letting that play in the background, and then allowing it to take over. The other thing I want to add to that, and I struggled with this, is having our phones, quick access to WebMD, right, which makes us feel terrible no matter what we're Googling. If you can, I would suggest this to everyone, cancer or not, charging your phone on the opposite end of the room. You're less likely to get up, pick up that phone, and Google something that's going to keep you up another hour. Because once our brain starts to wander, then we want Google to answer some of those questions. And then another hour passes and another hour passes. So separating yourself from your phone, lavender, white noise, and implementing a sleep routine.
excellent. Thank you. I agree that's for everybody. Final question. Thoughts of what ifs, and especially the cancer what ifs, take up so much of my day. So it's breaking throughout the day. How can I stay more present?
Meditation. Meditation's huge, guided meditation, which I know that there's a lot of things out there that make meditation seem very easy, but it's actually very, very difficult to be present and to not think about a million other things. So our brains are like a computer with all of these tabs open that we refuse to close, because what if I have to go back there and seek more information? And so guided meditation can help with centering you. And I always say start off small, 30 seconds. Don't try to do a whole hour. Don't try to do 20 minutes. Start off with 30 seconds and be intentional about making it through those 30 seconds. Doing that for a couple of weeks and progressing to a minute. But meditation can help with that. The other thing that's very helpful that I also do myself is writing down all of my what ifs. Every time I have a what if, I put it on paper. I take my pen I take paper or my journal and I put them together and I write it down and I shut that thing very quickly.
With the
Go ahead.
meditation,
Yeah.
I have a question now. So starting with the meditation, the small meditations and growing it, that sort of, maybe you do it in the morning or the evening, afternoon, whatever. Is that ultimately going to help you just in your day to day? So for instance, if you have a lot on your mind, I find myself I do this where I'm maybe tuning out family members because I've got a lot on my mind. I'm stressed about something, I'm kind of tuning out, or I'm driving and I can tell I'm distracted driving and just in my own head.
Right.
Does the meditation then help later on, like in those moments? Because you can't say you're in a conversation and your other part of your brain's thinking other things. You can't suddenly pause. I need to do a 30-minute,
Right.
30-second meditation. But is it the practice of meditation and learning how to be present? Is that going to help you throughout the day?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the misconception is that if I meditate, all of a sudden I have perfected, zoning out my negative thoughts. And that's not true, which is why I really encourage starting off small. So the intention or the objective of meditation is to learn to be present in the moment, which if we think about that dichotomy of worrying how it's going to impact me in the long term, isn't being present. Right. And so reminding yourself that the point of my meditation isn't necessarily to 5 years from now be able to zone out all of my negative thoughts. It really is simply for now. Now, with that being said, it becomes a habit. It becomes something that you get used to, and it becomes easier, which means as time goes on, progressively, you can prolong the effects. So if it works for 30 seconds today, ideally 6 months from now, it can work for an hour. Ideally, a year from now, it can work for half a day. And it's accumulative. It's accumulative. But I just want to remind us that if we're worrying about what meditation can do for us a year from now, we're totally skipping the whole purpose of meditation, which is to only worry about what it'll do for me in this moment.
Excellent. Well, I think we've gotten through a lot of great information, advice, content, questions. So I just want to say thank you, Natasha, for being here to help us, so close to the holidays. And thank you to everyone for participating, for sending in their questions. Thank you, Shauna, for organizing and setting everything up and managing all the stuff behind the scenes. And want to wish everyone really happy holidays, as happy as you can make them this year. And just thanks a lot for being here. And this is our final Ask the Expert of the year. Sorry, I'm seeing one more question. Can we squeeze in one more?
Yeah.
Do you differentiate
thank you.
what advice you give to metastatic breast cancer patients? For example, if someone is stable, so people assume they are over their cancer, but in
Yes.
reality, it can progress at any time and most likely will. So maybe, especially at the holidays, people see that you're stable and they don't realize, they think it should just be festive, happy Christmas time, and you have.
When those fears still exist, and they're very valid, right? That's a great question. So what I will say to that is, and I know I'm kind of being redundant here, is just remembering that you are the center of you as you are going through your metastatic cancer journey. If you are in a space where you feel as though, which is very likely because it's common across the board, where everyone is just like, look great, your hair it's grown back, you're wearing lipstick, your skin is glowing, per their perspective, it's okay to say thank you for the compliment, thank you for telling me I look good, but I would like for you to know that I don't always feel good. Now, that's tricky because I know that might come off as a little bit brash or maybe a little bit defensive. But you're the person in the crisis and you're in a healing process. Every time we allow someone to minimize where we are emotionally, physically, and mentally, we're starting half a step back. It is as much pain as we are in, it is our responsibility to set that tone, to reinforce those boundaries, to let those around us know. Some people will compliment us because they just don't know what else to say, and it's the wrong time, right? You know, I've had people tell me things that I'm just like, now you know that's not true. But I know why, I know you're saying it in an effort to bring a smile to my face. But you know, to piggyback on this question, it's the reality is it's not, because it's really not my reality. Your stage 4 can progress to a point where you don't know what 6 months looks you don't know what life looks like 6 months from now, and everyone else is moving on. So being transparent is so important. It's difficult, but it's really important. If we are not transparent with those around us, what we do is we leave room for them to fill that story. And when they do that, they're going to do what they think is best, which is compliment us and tell us we look great, even when we might not feel like it.
Thank you so much. I think, we'll all try to hold all this great advice and learning from tonight in our hearts and our heads as we move through the holidays and into 2021. So thank you again for being here
Thank
with
you.
us.
And thank you
And
for
thank you
having
again
me.
to everyone for participating.
Yes. Awesome.
Thank
Thank you. Thank
Great
you
night,
all.
everyone.